Welcome, everyone. Hello to our first webinar in 2022, hosted by the Alliance of Democracies Foundation in partnership with Facebook. The topic for our discussion today is foreign influence operations in the Western Balkans, and I'm delighted that we will welcome a fantastic group of distinguished speakers in a minute. My name is Olaf Bönke. I am the Berlin's director of the Alliance and the senior advisor to our Transatlantic Commission on Election Integrity. Maybe a short intro to the Alliance of Democracies Foundation and the Transatlantic Commission on Election Integrity. Since 2018, our commission is focused on the global threat of election interference. And with our activities, we aim to raise awareness of the global threat of election interference, both amongst democratic governments and policymakers, as well within civil society, the media, and explicitly in exchange also with the tech sector. That's the reason why we agreed to cooperate for this event with Facebook to discuss the challenges we identified together with them. And at the end of the seminar, I will also introduce you to Facebook's regional director for Central and Eastern Europe. Regarding the sequence of the discussion, I will introduce you in a minute to the speakers of our first panel. We will have half an hour for a more open, more geostrategic discussion on the Western Balkans and the nature of foreign influence operations there. Before I give the floor to Mariam, who will moderate our session with our distinguished speakers from the region who really know what's happening on the ground in the specific countries, and before we then close at the very end. As I said, I have one announcement, unfortunately, or one unfortunate announcement. The High Representative for Bosnia and Herzegovina, Christian Schmidt, just called me an hour ago and said that due to some very super urgent occupations and obligations, actually, he has to cover. He will not make it, so unfortunately he can't be here, and there was no substitute for him. So would love to have him here, but we understand that his position comes with these kind of challenges, that his schedule is not always in his hands only. But still, he volunteered, or he said if possible, actually, he will join us for some of the other webinars we might do on the region in the coming month. So still with us is, and I'm very glad that she's here, Dominika Hajdú. She's the head of the Center for Democracy and Resilience at GlobSec, which focuses on defending democracy against subversive efforts aiming to undermine it at the exemption of strategies, actors, and tools utilized in information operations. In this capacity, she led GlobSec's recent report, the Vulnerability Index, which she will introduce to us in a second. And it was really interesting to read it because it covers not just the countries from the Western Balkans, also from Eastern Europe, but it's a great read just for everyone actually to already mark actually that you should download it. In research, Dominika is focusing on the impact of information operations and social media on democratic societies. And in her recent capacity, she has also led several international research, awareness raising and capacity building projects for various target groups aiming to build societal and state resilience. And in this regard, we have very much the same agenda, it seems to me. Second with us is Thomas Hendrik Ilves, who actually needs no further introduction. He's a world-known and by now elder statesman. He's a long-serving politician from Estonia. I think especially as president of his country from 2006 to 2016, he was a driving force behind Estonia's impressive path of digitalization. And after a long and impressive career in politics, he has many different titles and hats throughout the international academia world. But of course, I have to mention that he's also a member of our Transatlantic Commission on Election Integrity. And this makes it really interesting, he's also a member of the real Facebook Oversight Board, which is not to be confused with Facebook's Oversight Board. And so therefore, I'm very glad you're here to help us to spice up the discussion. Without further ado, I turn to Dominika and asking you, as I already mentioned, your team at GlobSec recently published this revealing new report called the Vulnerability Index, which measures the vulnerability of some Western Balkan countries. to foreign influence, and it provides a powerful taste of Europe's Europe's confrontation with Russia on the one hand, and also with China and others, and how it's affecting the strategically important part of the world, which is sometimes called a melting pot, sometimes the forefront of Europe. Countries in close proximity to the EU and NATO, that's definitely what the Western Balkan countries are. So these countries aspire or could aspire membership and closer partnership for both the EU and NATO, and that also makes them, of course, an interested target for foreign influence. So I just would open in a very general way, asking you, what are the main findings and conclusions from the new index? What makes the Western Balkan countries more vulnerable to foreign political influence than maybe others? Dominika, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Olaf, for the invitation and the opportunity to speak at this event, and also for already promoting the Vulnerability Index in such a way. I'm very grateful for that. So in this research, we focused on socio-political vulnerabilities to foreign influence. So we tried to look at what are the vulnerabilities inside of these countries from a socio-political perspective that actually open the doors to foreign influence, or have already opened the doors or facilitated to foreign influence. And we primarily looked at Russian and Chinese influence. So just to give you a bit of insight, so those 5 dimensions, they were public attitudes, so what people think, political landscape, so what political actors do and what they say, public administration, so the strength of the institutions and legislation, and then the information landscape, importantly, and civic and academic space. And naturally, it is important to say that, of course, the Western Balkan region differs. The countries differ between each other in many aspects, and also the communities within them differ in many aspects, especially also when it comes to their foreign policy interests, right? So whereas in Serbia or in Montenegro, it is there is a greater openness both among the public and political representatives towards both Russia and China. Albania is by majority very pro-US, etc. But nonetheless, we found some common features that we were able to observe across the region in terms of vulnerabilities. So in all the countries, actually, the most vulnerable dimension were public attitudes. Because, and one of the aspects that we found is that people are in general very satisfied with how their system, how democracy works in their country. They have the feeling that democracy has under-delivered for them. And I mean, often rightfully so, because and this is related to another vulnerability that we found. There is a endemic corruption still present in Western Balkans, as there is in most of the post-Soviet sphere, that these countries were just not able to eradicate. And this hinders not only democracy building, but also opens the door to foreign influences. So eventually in all the countries that we covered, we found that endemic corruption is a door opener for foreign influence to seep in. And this disillusionment with democracy is, combined with the also strong disillusionment among many about the EU, because it is not seen as this, shining star upon the hill anymore. Also, sometimes it is becoming to see, they're becoming to see it as some unattainable goal toward which the Balkans are making sacrifices, but they receive nothing back in return. This is getting particularly strong in North Macedonia, which has been traditionally the most pro-EU or very strongly pro-EU, for example. And all this makes the most affected groups, I would say, more prone to flirt with alternatives. And of course, it is being used and amplified by populist leaders, or in some cases also corrupt leaders, some of whom are also in the governments, who are capitalizing on these attitudes and frustrations, and then alone are acting as door openers to this foreign influence. So in the political landscape, there are strong vulnerabilities, of course, in this respect as well. And even if there are like quality media in these countries, once the leaders, such leaders dominate the political scene, it is then impossible not to broadcast the narratives which are, pro-Russian, pro-Chinese, anti-democratic into the information space, into the public, because they must be broadcast as they are shared by the key political leaders. So unfortunately, despite the existence of some quality media, the information space is a source of vulnerability too in these countries. Moreover, in the information space, of course, we also observe in countries like Serbia stronger state capture and influence of the government on the media. When it comes to local media, for example, we found that local outlets are actually sourcing from, Russian or Chinese news agencies, because these are, offering the content for free, and there's also sometimes lack of awareness of which sources to use for what purposes. But of course, one of the key vulnerabilities is the sometimes completely unregulated online space and social media space, which is full of free-flowing disinformation, both from domestic and foreign sources. And this is usually disrupting any resilience building efforts. And, despite any Russian, China-owned media, there's a plethora of online websites and social media pages that we found interact with each other, actually amplify each other's content, which are pushing forward what we call not maybe pro-Russian, pro-Chinese narratives, but the narratives which play into the hands of Russia or China. So, these are anti-democratic narratives, or those undermining democracy, undermining the West, pushing forward the importance of traditional values, often portraying Russia as this protector of these traditional values, which the West is supposedly destroying, etc. So these are just proliferating on in the social media space, and unfortunately, there is not enough policies in place and measures in place that could actually stop them on social media. And we found this as one of the key vulnerabilities that actually has to be addressed, also via collective action, because eventually, while large social media companies are taking measures to spread to stop the spread of disinformation, information manipulation, those are rather small markets for the large corporations, right? And I see that actually on the example of Slovakia, where I come from as well. These governments or these actors from the smaller markets do not have that much bargaining or leverage power to actually implement some further measures in these social media companies. So there actually needs to be some perhaps international stronger action to tackle these challenges. But I want to just end on a positive note, because besides the fact that we identified many vulnerabilities, there are also some positives that should be highlighted. For example, in North Macedonia, there is an action plan for countering disinformation. Also, the government has created a database of trustful media sources on certain criteria that needs to be fulfilled. And in all countries, and I guess this will be visible in the second panel, there is a plethora of important initiatives which play a key role in helping form more resilient societies. And those are working primarily on, fact checking and on media literacy. And they're doing a great job, even in countries when the political climate is not probably so positively open to tackling that by policymaking.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for this interesting introduction. And as I mentioned, given Thomas Ilves' long-ranging experience in politics, so we are heading for two important elections in Serbia in April and in Bosnia in October, and we already see the very vulnerable situation in Bosnia already right now. So it gives us maybe an appetite of what we can expect. So Thomas, from your experience, so why are elections a specific period of time actually where these kind of vulnerabilities actually can be exploited explicitly, and how do you see the situation? So as Dominika described, so it's also, it seems to be kind of a result that the US is maybe not engaged any longer in the way actually they used to be in the Western Balkans, and the EU is not capable to cover this deficit. So is it maybe even kind of our own fault that the situation is so exposed to countries like Russia and China?
Well, let me first comment in general on what Dominika talked about. So, and then I will talk about elections as a specific issue. But first of all, one of the things that I disagree with is that, oh, all these post-communist countries are corrupt. My country, and I'll get to why, but my country, the most recent corruption risk report had the order of countries in lack of corruption as Finland, New Zealand, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and Estonia. So in Europe, the 5th least corrupt country out of all of Europe. And this means that, everyone else, Germany, whatever, Switzerland, they're all behind us. So it doesn't have to be just EU. So I think, this idea that corruption is endemic and you can't get rid of it because it's a post-communist country is one of the things that really bothers me. It's not true. It is possible. We were highly corrupt 30 years ago, but it's 30 years, and 30 years of continuous work on this does things. Secondly, on corruption, there are two kinds. There's petty corruption and grand corruption. Grand corruption is when you buy a minister, and petty corruption is when you have to buy an appointment with the doctor. And it's not just, post-commie countries. There's even a term, fakilaki, in Greece, which means little envelope, because if you want anything done with the bureaucracy, you have to give them a little envelope. Well, both of those destroy citizens' trust in government. One is it destroys trust in political leaders. The second, it just destroys trust in the operation of the state. So I would, say these things are doable, not before the election, but certainly what helped us was a long-term path of digitization that really makes the tax authority, if digitized, raises dramatically tax compliance, which then gives you more money and gives you more faith in the government. And I will say here in my country, there's a big difference. Everyone hates all of the politicians because they're all stupid. People's trust in the operation of governance, in English, it's the two things are all the same, but in the the state is very, very high. Police, since no police, police can't take bribes for speeding tickets anymore because it's all digital. People trust the police. The tax authority is highly appreciated. So it's doable. That's my first comment. On the EU being unattainable. All right, Macedonia is a specific case because you have this utterly ridiculous, immoral, rude, and completely out of this world veto by Bulgaria. That's like a rule in the EU, is you don't block those people who come immediately after you, especially if you yourself are not doing that well and are one of the countries that needs the most support from the EU and have corruption issues. You don't go blocking someone else. And this is just like, it's not done. That's just the way it is. It's like being a pig at a formal dinner. You know, you just, how you behave matters. And I think this ought to be told to Bulgaria that stop it. You don't have that kind of right to do it. I mean, I'm being direct and nasty, but I'm really annoyed by that kind of thing. On the unattainability of the EU, look, when we started, when I became foreign minister in 1996, I changed the whole approach of our foreign policy, which was then we were not in NATO, we were not in the EU, and everyone was saying NATO, 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 NATO. And I said, forget about NATO. Now, this is not true with the Balkans, but in any case, at that time, it was the opposition of Germany and France and the UK to any kind of membership for a country like Estonia was so high that I said, look, we have to join the EU because then they can't veto our accession to NATO. Now, you're in a different situation now with some of the countries in the Balkans, which is that they're in NATO, but they're not in the EU. But we got into the EU, and the whole point of getting into the EU is that you need to do active reforms, constant reforms. I mean, my task that I set was Estonia can never be less good than Poland on anything, because the political decision was there to take Poland, and so we just said we can't give the EU an excuse to say no because we're not doing so, because we're doing less well than Poland. So that was the bar. That meant that we had to push through a lot of reforms because we were starting later than Poland, and it takes a lot of political will. But I mean, if you say the population is depressed in other countries than Macedonia because it looks like the EU is unattainable, that's not the EU's fault. That's the fault of the politicians who don't have the political courage to take the steps that need to be taken. And they can be very unpopular. I mean, I was like highly unpopular as foreign minister before we got into the EU. It was like, oh, what does he mean? He's going to become run by Brussels, all this crap. All right, now let me get to Facebook and small countries. Here, I would really use the European Union. Look, the Russians started a massive disinformation campaign against Annalena Baerbock once it became clear she was going to be one of the leading Green candidates. And
during the German elections, for everyone who's not doing the German elections, for everyone who's not following all the candidates. Yeah.
And so this is Germany, right? And even there, it did not help. I mean, to do it on their own. I think that what you need to do is to really muster every democratic sort of organization, be it this one now or other ones that, the German Marshall Fund, they have a whole program on democracy, the NED, National Endowment for Democracy, Green parties who are highly aware of these. I mean, the Green Party in Germany, I think, should be a partner, but get them all to, do a good presentation. Look, see, this is what's happening. Could you please help us to get Facebook to do something? Because you're right, they don't listen to countries. They don't listen to countries if they're small. So you need to get some big players behind you. Obviously, you need to go and talk to the US State Department and complain loudly and say, look what's going to happen. I mean, that's probably your best partner for that, because it's their country's company that is not taking care of getting rid of disinformation. I think they don't want to be painted with that, that their country's company is allowing disinformation to disrupt a democracy and democratic elections. So those are my Bye.
Okay. Maybe also invite all the participants who want to join here with Dominika and Thomas in the opening of that session to chip in with comments or questions. But did you, Dominika, identify a specific difference? So your report, maybe for everyone who hadn't had a chance to read it, actually, so you covered Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Romania, Serbia, and Slovakia. Did you identify a specific difference in strategy of foreign actors between maybe the EU members here and those in the Western Balkan countries who are not members of the EU? Are they operating differently, or is it always more or less the same playbook, then it localized in a different version?
Yeah, thanks. So we definitely identified differences. I wouldn't say that the playbook is different based on whether the country is an EU or non-EU member, because, for example, as Mr. Ilves mentioned, in Bulgaria, Bulgaria has a very strongly pro-Russian society, but also they are very dependent when it comes to energy or their other strategic infrastructure on Russia, and there is a lot of Russian funding in their strategic infrastructure projects. So like there is also economic or energetic dependence. So and they're using economic leverages and influence on the media, for example, on the large media, mainstream media in the country. In Slovakia, which is also traditionally more pro-Russian country, they were primarily focusing indeed on the spreading of disinformation campaigns, on relationship building with some key political actors who were helping them spread pro-Russian narratives, etc. Whereas in countries where there is a lack of this tradition in like pro-Russian tendencies or pro-Russian openness also among the political sphere, which is like mostly in Czech Republic or Romania, their influence has been limited. So and these were just countries within the EU that we monitored, and you can see that the approaches are very much different. And this like and then on the other side you have Serbia, which is like also very traditionally very anti-NATO, thus anti-US and also pro-Russian. So like there, basically the door is very much open. They're also members of the CSTO, the agreement with Russia. So well, there the tools of influence and the windows of influence are of course enabled in all aspects of the society. Basically, also the Serbian Orthodox Church plays, for example, a strong cultural role in influencing the agenda, and this is similar in Montenegro. So in conclusion, I would say that like the EU countries, there are indeed more resilient to foreign influence in some respects, especially because, as Mr. Ilves mentioned, the reforms, right? There has to be some legislative resilience, and there must be some checks and balances in place in these countries in order to guarantee some degree of resilience. But on the other hand, there are just so many cultural and societal vulnerabilities that actually can be very well utilized by all these actors.
And maybe to the two of you, so when we look specifically on the information space, then what we have observed is that there are definitely differences in the playbooks of the foreign actors. So as we said, and I think we all can name plenty of examples how Russia and Russian state actors have misused the open information space and democracies actually to steer existing conflicts within societies, while China, as the other big player in the region, actually usually don't go that path, but way more actually is focused on creating a positive image of China. But then actually all the information interference operations actually are more or less limited to that fact. Would you agree with this observation that this is also true for the Western Balkan countries?
Well, China bribes you. I mean,
yeah, they create economic dependencies.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, so, and you can see what the result has been. The worst is probably Sri Lanka, but I don't think it was. The port of Piraeus going was that great an idea either. But there are a lot of countries that are there are many governments that wouldn't mind, a hefty bribe, because that's basically how Sri Lanka went. I mean, they took a
Okay.
Impossible, but they did it anyway because if you bribe enough people in the government, that's how you get it there.
Okay. Dominica, from your report.
Yeah, indeed. And it's also about the goals, right? So Russian goal is to, disrupt, divide the NATO members, the EU members. China's goal is not as much disrupt, divide as it is about, having good image, having presence, so their influence operations, if there were any, they focus mostly on, positive image of China vis-a-vis, vis-a-vis Taiwan, vis-a-vis Tibet, vis-a-vis Uyghur minority, trying to suppress, information about these issues, which are sensitive for them. So yeah, definitely.
Okay, I get a final question from the audience, from Neil Silber, who is asking how concretely civil society can get involved to effectively counter disinformation, and that's a perfect bridge to give the floor and the moderation to my colleague Mariam, who is our fellow in Georgia, Tbilisi, and together we observed and analyzed the elections a year and a little bit a half ago in Georgia, and identified similar patterns, I would say, from what you described, Dominica. So therefore, she knows how it looks on the ground in a post-communist country, and how existing differences in society can be exploited by a pro-Russian media landscape. So therefore, without further ado, I give the floor to Mariam to discuss with her guests actually how exactly civil society organizations in the countries we talked about already did excellent work and are continuing in that regard to fight these kind of foreign influences. Mariam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Olaf. Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, dependent on where you are currently. I'm Mariam Chikladze, Election Integrity Fellow at the Alliance of Democracies Foundation. Thanks to previous speakers who gave us a general overview, so to say, strategic overview of what's going on in the region, and unfolded briefly some vulnerabilities this region, this inherently intrinsic region, I would say, makes vulnerable against foreign interference. We're going to continue this line, but dive deep into experiences of specific countries. We have representatives, speakers from Serbia, from Bosnia Herzegovina, and North Macedonia. And the people who we have invited for today's second panel are leaders of civil society in their countries. Actually, they are foremost minds and top researchers of disinformation and foreign interference in their countries. And the work they are doing is very important. We will hear more about them. Before that, let me remind the audience that there are two elections coming up, as Olaf noted, in this year in Serbia and in Bosnia Herzegovina. In addition, Bosnia Herzegovina is facing currently, is on the verge of important conflict or how to say political disintegration, maybe. We will discuss that later in the when we invite the speaker from the country. Also we have the speaker from North Macedonia, which is the newest member of NATO, and probably one of the myths it would be is that we all have heard is that NATO and EU membership solves the conflicts and internal tensions and in divided societies. We will hear how true is that and what has changed since membership in Macedonia. We have all-female panel on the second part of the event. Let me introduce Dragana Obradovic, Serbia country director of Balkan Investigative Reporters Network, prominent organization covering the region actually, and Dragana is prominent expert of disinformation, governance issues, transparency. We also have Diana Sveticanin from Bosnia Herzegovina. We will, as High Representative had to cancel his participation in a very last minute, we will give more time to Diana to give us a general overview also what's happening on the ground currently. She is a founder of two major fact-checking platforms and editor-in-chief of one of them currently. So she is media expert, discourse analyst, so to say, and EU integration issues expert too. And Rosana Aleksovska from North Macedonia. She is leading one of the major programs of fact-checking and investigative project run by Citizen Association Most in North Macedonia. So we will hear from her too. I think it will be only logical to start with Tiana, as I was asked. Tiana, Bosnia is facing one of the worst political crises currently. And let me ask you directly, what tools and tactics are used by foreign malign actors in this situation currently to exploit vulnerabilities? What are these vulnerabilities actually, and how this is going to affect Bosnia's democratic future moving forward? We have mentioned that we have elections coming up later in this year. And feel free to talk about your research and your work as well. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for these questions. They're all very tough. And I would like to start by saying that what is usually understood under foreign influence or foreign malign influence may need to be like, may need to rethink it a little bit when we are talking about Bosnia, because if we're talking about, foreign malign influence in the Western Balkans, for Bosnia, a huge and maybe the most significant foreign malign influence comes from the Western Balkans, comes from its neighboring countries. So this is the most direct and the most impactful foreign influence that we are feeling in Bosnia. It comes from Serbia, it comes from Croatia, it comes from their political elites who have really strong ties with our own political elites. In their respective, ethno-political groups that identify with them, and that kind of like build their whole policy and build their whole political PR and ideology on these ties and these connections. So this is something that is impacting the politics in Bosnia in the most direct and I think the most visceral way, and has been since the war, and of course, before it. So this is something that needs to be said, that when we're thinking about this and we're thinking about tools and tactics that we're feeling the most here come from these, for example, if you take Serbia into account, you have this hot and cold approach of one day we'll hear the officials saying that they're of course, supporting the integrity and the independence and the sovereignty of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but then the next day they're going to have some kind of a statement about the Srpski svet or like Serb world, which is now become kind of a dog whistle that signifies, you know, the things that we've heard in the 90s, which is about, you know, like Serb countries or wherever Serbs live, etc. And this revival of this like very explicit and aggressive nationalist ideology is present. It's present and is having a serious comeback, as you kind of hinted in this introduction, in the crisis that we're facing now. And in the crisis that we're facing now, the theme that is being most, repeated here is the attempt to kind of to present the Bosnia and Herzegovina as some sort of like a loose confederation of countries that may separate at some point, meaning that Republika Srpska may secede. This is the gist of this like disruptive narrative that is being, you know, fueling this crisis. And what fuels this narrative is this like sometimes low key, sometimes a bit higher key support that comes from Serbia and from Serbian political class. So that's one like side of that coin. The other one is comes from Croatia, and it especially has been coming from Croatia since it entered the EU, and that is something that is particularly complicated and really hard to handle from a perspective of a sovereign country that is an aspiring EU member, because this discourse of entering the European Union and becoming like, you know, if we're going to go into this like symbolic a register of that discourse, becoming a part of the European family, etc., etc. All of these symbolic notions have been hijacked more or less successfully by HDZ, the dominant Croat identified party in Bosnia, with a very extensive and intensive and open help from political class in Croatia, and not just their, you know, immediate ideological peers, such as like the HDZ from Croatia, but also from what's been perceived as the left or the center left in Croatia, like SDP. So both in their capacity as members of the European Union, as MPs in the European Parliament, as representatives in the executive bodies in the European Union, and in their capacity as a neighboring country that has bilateral relationships with Bosnia, they have really undermined this idea of, you know, democratic civic country that Bosnia, in my opinion, needs to become if it's going to become functional, because it's currently definitely not. And this is something that when this discourse of being European is kind of equated with granting HDZ what they're like purposely looking for, which is some sort of like they call it legitimate representation. That's actually also a code word for having a guarantee that their representative is always going to be sitting in the presidency at the state level. That's a real problem, and that's a very direct malign influence coming from outside the country. Then when we kind of move to a bit more like a geopolitical level and outside of our immediate neighborhood, we do have very visible, and I would also say not that hidden, kind of open ties with certain anti-democratic regimes. And they're not really being, you don't have to go looking for them. You don't have to kind of investigate to find them, because they've been used as a political tactic and as a political strategy of our own political leaders. For example, you would have Milorad Dodik, who is, the most important political figure in Republika Srpska, and definitely one of the most important in Bosnia, who is openly kind of presenting Vladimir Putin as his mentor, as his patron, as his partner, etc., etc. And this is something that is not seen as a connection that needs to be revealed by someone. It's out there in the open. It's used as a part of their it's how they court their, voting body, their constituency, because as has been mentioned before, this like pro-Russian sentiment and this idea that there are cultural or spiritual or whichever ties between Serbs as peoples and Russia is just a very fertile ground to use this as a tactic to make yourself seem more important by aligning yourself with a leader such as Putin is. We have very similar tactics used by, Bakir Izetbegovic from SDA, which is the largest Bosniak identified party in Bosnia, who invites Erdogan to his daughter's wedding and kind of like, Well, like taps into this relationship that he has with him whenever he's facing some sort of like PR or otherwise political crisis here, and then the same principle is used. So this is my patron from a bigger, powerful country that is a really important player, and he has my back. He is like supporting me in the same way that Dodik is doing with Putin, and to a lesser degree, of course, with political figures from Serbia, whoever they are. I mean, he's been doing the same regardless of whether that was, I don't know, Boris Tadic or Aleksandar Vučić or whoever else. So it's really complicated when we're talking about foreign influence and what it means here and what tactics and tools are, because some of them I wouldn't even call tactics in a way like that implies that this is something that is like, hidden and that you really need to go deep diving to find it. No, it's just like it's pretty mainstream the way that it's done here. And the same goes for the influence of Serbia and Croatia, because it's exploiting this feeling that has been meticulously created and sustained since the war, that we have these three constituent groups, these three ethnic groups. They need to have each their own patrons, each their own anchors of identity that are outside of Bosnia in to some degree, depending like which group we're talking about, because it's much more present for Serbs and Croats. And that's how the whole system has been running for like 30 years. So that's what we have. And that's why it's really hard to compare Bosnia to countries like countries of former Eastern Bloc, because that's not the situation that we have. Ours is way more complex. And when it comes to this, how to say, the consequences that this may have, I mean, we're living them. We already have these consequences. I'm very wary of giving any kind of prognosis into what this crisis may mutate into, because for the past, I don't know, like maybe 10 years or so, this has been a very, very common refrain that each year is worse than the one before. And it really has been in terms of political discourse, in terms of like these elements of dissolution that have been becoming more and more mainstream. So what's acceptable today, what's acceptable to say as a public official, what's acceptable to display as a, I don't know, a symbol out in the street or on like a wall of some building has not been acceptable in the same way 5 years ago or 6 years ago or 7. So it has been escalating. It has been getting worse. Where does it actually end, and how, or like what's the way that we are, going to overcome it? I'm really, really not sure. And of course, where these influences are going to be playing at, like how they will be influencing it. I think so far we have not seen any kind of meaningful response, I would say, to them, because you have you can impose sanctions on Dodik, and that's going to kind of make some things difficult for him. But I don't think it's going to make too many difficult things too difficult for him if he is like on some blacklist in the United States. The thing that I think is more important is to have a meaningful response from our immediate surrounding, which is the European Union. And I'm afraid it has not, like the EU has not done enough to kind of distance itself from this hijacking that has happened of the whole narrative of the European integrations. And the thing that makes the whole thing worse is that Dodik is finding new partners in this like populist leaders, right-wing populist leaders from the EU itself. So we have a lot of examples of Dodik and his orbit connecting to figures like, I don't know, Orban, or like MPs from some like right-wing parties in the European Parliament, and or even like in the US, we would see like in the past administration's term, like them getting really cozy with Steve Bannon, etc. So all of these things are sending dangerous messages to people here, and I think this is something that would need to change in order to be able, for us to discuss like what's the real response to all of these, disruptive and really dangerous narratives coming from different like distances to Bosnia. And finally, to your question on how this is spread and how disinformation actually spreads here. We've done this research 3 years now, actually. Yeah, one has kind of disappeared. 3 years ago, where we looked into these hubs of disinformation that we're seeing, and disinformation that are specifically targeting topics from the area of politics. So we try to track like which media outlets are constantly using each other as sources and amplifiers of disinformation about political topics. And these are mostly exactly these topics that we're talking about: anti-Western narratives, conspiracy theories about this or that ethnic group, this revival of like wartime warmongering propaganda, etc., etc. And this whole universe, what dominates it is this whole universe where, like, you know, the interests of one particular peoples is kind of equated with these anti-Western, pro-Putin, etc. narratives. And what we have found is that there is really a very tangible and traceable connection between several media outlets in Republika Srpska and in Serbia, and between political actors that are kind of peddling these narratives. And you can really see that there is this whole, like, what kind of a well-oiled machine where when you publish something that I need to you know, tackle my current PR crisis or whatever, I can really count on the fact that it's going to appear within minutes or hours across the border and kind of get spread to that audience as well. And what has been interesting in this context that we are discussing today is that one of the major connecting dots in that hub is Sputnik Serbia, the outlet of Sputnik that is located in Belgrade, and that, as also has been mentioned, is gaining a lot of like secondhand impact by distributing its content to whoever wants it, basically. And I mean, to be honest, everyone wants free content here, because in general, like, the media professionalism and abiding to professional standards are not super high in anywhere in the region, and especially not here. So this is something that's, I think, a very useful, like a clever tactic to kind of get your narrative spread wide and far. And if you know that this is a state-sponsored outlet that is basically set up to do this, to kind of like spread propaganda, and if you know that this is one of these connecting dots that is right in the center of that hub, together with, unfortunately, a public broadcaster from Republika Srpska, then that also tells you that it has become an important part of this, like, disinformation ecosystem that we're seeing, and it's used for not just like spreading official narrative and propaganda of the Russian Federation, but also of the local political actors, because these two things have been kind of merged in a lot of ways and are appearing as one same narratives. Okay, I think I went over my time, so I'll stop now.
Well, thank you very much, Diana, for your very rich and insightful comments about actually each question we have asked so far. Thank you very much. Let me, for the sake of time, move to another speaker, and I'm sure there will be some questions to go back to some of the points you have raised. Let me invite Dragana Obradović to provide us to provide us more information about Serbia, Serbian context, disinformation ecosystem there. We understand disinformation is a predominant tool foreign actors use, and also which is amplified by domestic actors as well, pretty successfully. So how do you unfold the current situation, disinformation ecosystem for Serbia? What are predominant narratives, predominant tools and tactics? And again, like as I asked to Diana, feel free to let us know about your research and major findings of your research as well. Thank you.
So basically, that is important to know that Serbian media are highly controlled by the government, to understand that we don't actually need any foreign actors to create this information ecosystem in Serbia, because like local politicians and the government are the main perpetrators of all the disinformation that is coming to Serbia. And that is probably specific in comparison to some other countries, not so much countries of the region, but if you speak about the European countries where this influence is seen as the influence from the abroad. Here, like mainstream media and the politicians in the highest positions are basically advocates of these positions. So it is quite telling, for example, to know that television being the most important and the most influential source of information in Serbia, by about 70% of citizens of Serbia are forming their views based on the information that they're getting from the TV. It's then important to know like that mostly positive narrative about Russia and China is coming from TV. And vast majority of that narrative then comes from the politicians that are quoted, that are participating in TV shows, and so on and so forth. So social media networks are playing, I would say, better, not so much important role on influencing public opinions. I would say still in Serbia, I guess maybe that's the case in the rest of the Balkans. I would like to hear that, for example, from our colleagues, like traditional media, like TV in the first place, but also online media and newspapers are the main information source, and they are influencing public opinion, which then as a result of that, but also, as we mentioned, some cultural and historical circumstances is more inclined to the east, to the Russia and the China, results in the fact that, for example, Serbian citizens are seeing Russia and China as the biggest allies, as the biggest donors of Serbia, the countries that we should rely on, and so on, while EU is only on the third place after years of declining support in the Serbia. So I would say if we want to tackle disinformation, it's not going to be mainly through social media. It's not going to be through all these fringe groups that actually exist there. And I can speak about it like in a minute, but the main thing is to tackle the information that is coming from the official sources, from the politicians, and from the mainstream media, because that's where the information, disinformation is created, and all these narratives about like the role of Russia or the China in, for example, fighting pandemic, or let's say our military stability, economic stability, and so on are coming from. When it comes to the social media, they're important to as a good measurement of how polarized society is. And I would say like Facebook definitely is important, but Twitter is probably more influential in the circles where decisions are made, and is probably in that sense more vocal. And Twitter started participating in the media content in a way that it often happens that some influencers, let's call them that way, tweet something that media take it over, amplify that story comes to the parliament at the end, like even president in his speeches refers to something that somebody tweeted, let's say. So that is how this influence of social networks is growing to basically through the symbiosis that actually exists with the mainstream media and with the political establishment. Without that, it wouldn't be, I would say, so vocal and so important. When it comes to social media, also like Facebook and Twitter are the most that the ones that we are mostly talking about, but YouTube definitely is the place where most of disinformation is coming from, at least when it comes to Serbia, about the things that are not political in their nature, but are more the matters of society, of health, lifestyle, and things like that. And many people are sharing that. And also in TikTok as well, like is becoming big in Serbia, but also networks, informal networks that are existing on Telegraph, on Viber, and so on, through which like a lot of disinformation is spread, are the places through which some especially right-wing groups, anti-LGBT group, anti-migrant groups are recruiting their members. But since we are here speaking mainly about the politics, like definitely my message would be that the political disinformation, political propaganda, and the sentiment towards the foreign actors is not created from the outside, but is created from the inside.
Well, thank you very much. That was super interesting. And we will also go back to some of the remarks you have made a bit later. I expect some questions coming in as well, and I do encourage attendees to pose the questions if they have so in the Q&A section. Let's move to the third speaker, Rossana Aleksovska. Thank you very much again for joining us today. I would have pretty much a similar question as an opening question to you too. How would you describe the current situation in terms of disinformation and foreign influence in Macedonia? We are well aware that in the time of COVID-19, COVID-19 related disinformation has emerged as one of the key problems also. Would you unfold the situation for us a little bit? Thank you.
Okay, I would like to thank you for the invitation, and I would also like to thank the previous speaker, because they portrayed a little bit the situation and the region, and thanks to the audience for coming here and listening to us. So this discussion is of great importance, because here in the Balkans, we all need to address these issues as soon as possible. In comparison to the Central and Eastern European countries, as well as the Baltic states, I can say that here on the Balkan, there is somehow a lack of domestic interest about the issues of foreign malign influence or the influence which comes from the authoritarian regimes. I'm really glad that North Macedonia is considered as some kind of shining light here, and I'm also proud of the recent achievements, becoming the 38th NATO member. And this means that Russia was defeated. However, the challenges are not stopping, but they are actually increasing. Just briefly, so for 20 years, my organization was in the front line of monitoring of the political processes in the country, with the focus on elections. And since 2016, we have started also to look more deeply in the issues of disinformation, including ways and mechanisms how to better understand and counter the disinformation and the malign influence. And based on all the experience, the first need that needs to be clarified is that here we are dealing with the concept of sharp power. The concept which we are using to describe this kind of influence derives from the series of reports published by the National Endowment for Democracy. But let me just briefly go through it, where the main, let's say, definition derives from the fact that the authoritarian regimes within their countries are suppressing the freedom of speech and human rights, while they are at the same time misusing the principles of the open democracies and open societies in order to promote and achieve their strategic goals. So in this sense, authoritarian influence efforts in young and vulnerable democracies, and this is a category relevant for most of the Western Balkan countries, are sharp in the sense that they pierce, they penetrate, or perforate the information and political environment in the targeted countries. This means that this is a little bit upgrade of the definition which was used to describe the soft power, because through all the activities that these actors are performing, we can see that their final aim is not to win the hearts and the minds of the people, but it's just that they are surely seeking to influence the targeted audiences by manipulating or distorting the information that reaches the citizens across all the Western Balkan countries. Within the past years, we have captured a series of events and information operations which were aimed at defocusing, distorting, dismaying, discrediting, and dividing the citizens of the country. Besides this 5Ds methodology, which was not established by us, but by the researchers who were dealing with the issue before us, what we add to this methodology and what we see also is the element of amplification on the social media. And I will just shortly list some of the very important events that we captured, which are describing these techniques. So on the day when North Macedonia became the 30th NATO member, well-organized and coordinated disinformation campaign was conducted in a period of several days. It all started first with anti-US article, and then with the post on Facebook that the birds are dying in North Macedonia, implying that this is due to the 5G technology, and implying also that the 5G is harmful for the people. But the main aim was to distort the public discourse during the days and defocus the public from the historical achievement, and that is the NATO membership. In addition, these are very emotional topics resonating with people. So the second aim was to incite fear and sow confusion among the citizens. What we also saw as a technique is the were a recycled statement by NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg, where he was talking about the 5G network. But these statements were put completely in the wrong context. And this is how actually the whole campaign got also anti-NATO dimension. As I said, different tools were used from posts on social media, half-truths published on the websites to the online petitions. And in our country, online petitions does not have any legal implications, but they were used as a tool or as a carrier of the disinformation messages. So the intensity was huge. And for example, only one post reached 50,000 interactions, which for the online space in North Macedonia is huge. And this campaign had also impacted the real life, because we had citizens in one municipality protesting. The second case that I want to mention is that during the referendum in 2018, we saw influence of the Kremlin ideologists, for example, Alexander Dugin, who visited North Macedonia a few months before the referendum, thus setting the stage and putting in place the narrative that were later used by the opponents to the name change and NATO membership. In this, let's say, part, I would also mention Russian separatists from in Ukraine. For example, Andrei Rodionov, who was also present in the country, and he was also present in the one of the consular offices of the Russian embassy, trying to establish Balkan Cossack army. And also one of his key narratives was to promote Russian and North Macedonian Orthodox Brotherhood and Pan-Slavism. And how we see the things here is that all of these activities are just fully fitting within the concept of Russia for Russian world, or Ruski Mir. And in this, as part of the context, worth mentioning is the Balkan Cossack Army, the Night Wolves, organizations which are not present only in North Macedonia, but across the Balkans. So the third example is related to the elections. For example, during the parliamentary elections in 2020, we had the famous duo of Russian pranksters influencing the elections. And of course, their actions were amplified on the social media by the domestic actors. Worth mentioning and very important is the aspect of how the international issues are being covered within the from the Macedonian media. And in this regard, I would mention, for example, a study that we did. And in the chat, my colleague will send the links from our analysis or everything that I talk. So those who are more interested can find more data in the links in the chat. But going back to how the international issues are being covered, we can say that that we're witnessing different types of information distortions. In example, when domestic media were reporting about the HMS Defender incident during this summer in the Black Sea, out of 127 articles, a high number of 74 articles, or close to 60%, were with only Russian sources. And only 24 or 90% were with only UK sources. And on top of this, the UK sources were also twisted and manipulated to suit the Russian narrative. So the next concept that I want to raise is that when we are talking about the disinformation narrative, not just in North Macedonia, but also throughout the Balkans, we need to be aware that they are highly polarizing, and that they are divisive, and they are used in an effort to exploit the deeply rooted feelings and misbeliefs in order to discredit various actors, including the Western institutions. So these narratives many times, so as I said, so to incite fear, doubts, and confusions among the citizens in regards to certain political events in topic. Here I would mention also the coverage of the current Russian-Ukrainian conflict, but are also in many times related to the country's Euro-Atlantic integration. What is so all of this implies that things are not simple, but they are rather complex, because we cannot talk only about the influence without discussing the social context. And the process, the whole process functions in two directions. According to me, this is my personal opinion, what drives Russian disinformation and information operations are the misconceptions, misperceptions, and misbeliefs which are deeply rooted within part of the population, especially among the Orthodox population across the Balkan countries. So the bigger these three are, then the higher the impact of the influence gets. And in the other direction, the more disinformation and the more information distortion, the more enabling the social context becomes for these Russian narratives to resonate with the public. Furthermore, maintaining the context which will serve the Russian purposes and resonate with the population is very easily done in the Balkans, because only one factor is needed, and that is the nationalism. So only through, if we analyze the public opinions, which in my country, in North Macedonia, was traditionally and historically always high in support for NATO and EU integration. And if we consider the strategic orientation of the country, and that is full integration of Euro-Atlantic community, then we can conclude that the only way Russia can be perceived as international actor is through inciting and maintaining divisions and disputes in the Balkans. I mean, I can provide more details on the different types of Russian agents of influence, what are their roles or channels for, let's say, influence, but they should not be undermined. And what is also valid and worth noting is that I think that they work on a long run with a lot of patience towards, let's say, achieving their goal. I mean, we are finalizing analysis about the Victory Day parade, and we have mapped all of the different narratives and stuff. And I can talk also more about the narratives, how they manipulate the public with their military superiority, which nowadays, with the case with Ukraine and Kazakhstan, we see that it's just part of the context that they are creating, while their real aim was completely something else. In terms of the solutions, I can say that we advocate a whole of a society approach, because I doubt that different sectors individually can counter this. Collaborative action and mechanisms are needed, including increase in the research about these topics, increasing the knowledge and understanding. And I also agree with the idea that it will be very hard to have a unified approach for the Balkan countries in general, because as my previous interlocutors stressed, each country has its different specifics. And this is why we need to try to understand the different specifics. But of course, collaborative across the country approach is needed, mostly because, as Dominika said, the similar patterns which were observed, and also because of the changing of information and experience.
Thank you very much, Rosanna. Some of the anecdotal examples you have put forward was starking and was eye-opening as well, how detrimental disinformation campaigns can be and how it can actually alter people's behavior. Let me ask one question to all the speakers actually of the second panel, and whoever wants to take it. The floor is her. Well, we have discussed this foreign issue of foreign meddling, foreign influence, and how it is possible due to an absence of good governance, strong democratic governance, democratic institutions, and strong adherence to the rule of law, and how this absence of such systems polarize and further divide society, how it's easier for foreign actors to sow this division further. How do you see, you civil society leaders, as it was, to echo the first question which was dropped in, here in the Q&A section, how do you see how would you address this? How would you assess the situation of societal resilience and media literacy? What should be done further to curb the influence of foreign interference? Whoever wants to start. Thank you, Tiana.
If we're going to go with the same, like, yeah. I mean, that's actually one of the hardest questions, in my opinion, because if you have, like, the institutions themselves are not strong, they do not rely on like a long democratic tradition where the institutions are, you know, predominantly something that works in the public interest, and public servants are non-partisan, etc., etc. Unfortunately, that's not the situation in, I think, any of our countries. And what we have are institutions that are heavily guided by politics, by often, you know, very narrow interest party politics. And if you have that, then they can be and are used and abused for advancing a very narrow political party interests. So if you have that, then it's really difficult to discuss like how we can tackle this, because the way it should have been tackled already is by investing in education, is by investing in modernizing education, making it more, you know, tech savvy, making it more aware of the actual time that we live in. We don't have any of that because, for example, education in Bosnia in particular is still seen as like breeding ground for nationalisms and for kind of cultivating future, you know, ethnically defined constituencies. And that is its primary goal still. So in those circumstances, you don't really have a lot to go on in terms of like how do we build resilience to disinformation. I don't know. There are definitely exceptions. There are great people in institutions who work there, who are properly, you know, interested in public good, who are real civil servants trying to kind of make a difference. But I'm afraid their reach is really limited and their options are really limited, and their like toolboxes are super small because they are working within the compounds of something that is predominantly like a political interest. So then you have the civil society, and the civil society, I think, does a lot. I mean, does what it can do. Actually, you can do things to a certain point in these circumstances, but there is this wall that you cannot, you know, break if the institutions are non-responsive. They're going to remain non-responsive. That there's just like you can do as much. So we do what we can in terms of like we try to. Through our projects, we try to tackle political accountability. We try to tackle, you know, fight against disinformation. We try to motivate people to get more engaged, to understand that these things are there, you know, that the governance is their property, not the property of political parties, that the institutions are their property, that the public funds are theirs, not the politicians, etc., etc. These all may seem unrelated to this topic, but they're really not. Like, these are all the building blocks of resilience that are very, very hard to you know, to build in the circumstances that we have, I'm afraid. And I'm sorry that I don't have like a better, like, positive answer to that question.
Understandable. Thank you very much, Tiana. I see Olaf has a hand raising.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, so we're running out of time, but I want to chip into that really interesting discussion and to your question, Mariam, our colleague Katarina Kruk, she's the regional public policy manager from Facebook for Central and Eastern Europe, and she covers with her team all the countries: Albania, Bosnia Herzegovina, Kosovo, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Serbia, and then also Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. So she has a lot to cover. But I would be interested also to ask you, Katarina, that question. So how do you see the role of Facebook, which has a lot of impact, because you are the biggest platform on social media for people to interact on private issues, but also on politics and information. So how can Facebook, for instance, how do you see your options and capabilities to help fighting disinformation and misinformation, and also coordinated inauthentic behavior, as we observed, and it has been documented by your company in a very impressive way over the last years. I think in the result of the experiences from other elections, saying, okay, Facebook needs to step up and do something, and I think it's a very valuable contribution for the discussion. So, but how does that what you just listened to actually sound from the perspective of a platform like Facebook?
Thank you so much, Olaf, for the question. I see Rosanna has raised a hand. So is it in connection to the questions to Meta, or you still wanted to comment on the previous exchange? Rosanna?
Okay, yes, just one comment in terms of how we tackle. The answer is complicated because we are here discussing the fight between the open democracy and liberalism versus the values of autocracy and illiberalism. So we are discussing more serious issues, and I'm afraid that more needs to be done as a collaborative work. And in terms to Facebook, I just want to say that we see social media platforms as part of the solutions as well.
Thank you so much. I would like to start first that this is really a great comeback to the work from the season of winter holidays for me, because this was really very interesting discussion. And as Olaf mentioned, I have a great honor, but also a great responsibility to cover the countries from which you are coming. And to be honest, Bosnia and Herzegovina and developments there is definitely one of the things that was taking my sleep away, not only for me, but also from other colleagues, because obviously we're closely monitoring what is happening in the country. And first of all, we are monitoring how we as a platform hopefully not amplifying the dangerous tendencies which are playing already in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So when it comes to responsibility, I would say that this is the main word for me and also colleagues who work on different fields in the company, because we definitely understand the issues that sometimes we are part of. And the developments which are happening on our platforms, both with the sharing of the misinformation, with disinformation, with sharing of hateful content, content which is aimed at certain parts of the society, national minorities, religious minorities, and so on and so forth. So with a great opportunity that social platforms such as ours bring to have an open platform for discussion and sharing your views, obviously come very dangerous tendencies when this openness and access to many people can be abused. And fighting misinfo is definitely one of those fields where we know that this is happening on our platforms, and trying to find a way how to best tackle this, understanding that there is no silver bullet, that we as a technical company, first of all, and I will emphasize on this later, we can bring. And before I will go to the explaining how we trying to fight misinfo, I would only like to add that I myself, coming from the fact-checking community, before I joined Facebook, now Meta, back then it was still Facebook, I was working for Ukrainian fact-checking organization Stop Fake, which is also one of the best established and oldest fact-checking organizations in the region of Eastern Europe. And with the background of how obviously Russia is operating in Ukraine, in the neighboring countries, this is the baggage that I brought with myself to Facebook, to Meta. And even though I'm not working in the team which is focusing on misinformation policies and implementation of those policies, because we have a separate team with wonderful brains which are working on how to provide the best policies and how to enforce them in a proper way. I'm on the policy side of things, even though me representing company in those countries, having this type of background as a political scientist, but also as a person who is an analyst in the fields of information security, obviously provides an additional background knowledge to understand the challenges, but also the responsibility of the platform. So also from this perspective, not only as a Meta employee, but also as an expert in this field, I found this discussion today very, very enriching and interesting. And I would definitely will be willing to stay in touch with some of you if you will be willing to share your analysis. I was checking all the links that have been shared in the chat, or your findings about what is happening in the country with me later. But coming back to Meta, what I've already emphasized, that Meta and Facebook as a platform, or Instagram as a platform, we are technical platforms. And when you look at the misinformation from the technical perspective, it's about the source who is posting it, but also the speed how this information is being amplified and shared. Now, misinformation itself is really very much about the content. And here where the clash is coming, technical company, which is providing the infrastructure, which is in most of the cases consists of the engineers who are making it up and running and obviously always up there for you to use and for us to use. We don't have that much of the expertise to check the content of the information piece which has been shared on the platform for every single country, for every single language. That is why when we started working deeper on tackling misinformation, we started working and signing partnership agreements with local fact checkers, because in my opinion, also as a person who has fact checking background prior to joining the company, and this is something that also has been mentioned during our talk, the cooperation is the goal. Companies such as Facebook, as YouTube, as Twitter, we are having the technical capabilities to amplify the work of the fact checkers, to making sure that the pieces of content that have been fact checked or the truthful information that is shared can be reached by as many people as possible, or in terms of misinformation, we can limit the reach of those harmful informations as much as possible. But it is not possible for the company like ours, for the technical companies, to build enough knowledge and expertise base within us in order to be able to fact check the content. That is why the existing partnerships that we already have also in the countries from the Western Balkans region, but also the partnerships that we're thinking about in future, they're always focusing on cooperation, on you being local experts and understanding the background of what is happening in your country the best, sharing this knowledge with us, and us thinking of algorithm solutions, technical solutions, how to make this how to make it scalable. So I would say that this is obviously those are the different ways how you might think about the problem and how the company might think about the problem. And us having the responsibility of having almost 3 billion users on our platforms per month, active users. For us, the responsibility is to have scalable solutions, but we will never be as good into finding the content and checking the content. And without experts and NGOs providing insights to us and to other companies, other technological platforms, there will never be one solution that industry can come up with. So this is about the limiting, and I already mentioned the fact-checking program that we have, and this is precisely about using the knowledge that experts have and scaling the fact-checking work that they can do on the platform. Our fact-checkers, they have access to the special tool, which is basically influencing the algorithms and how the information is being shown on the newsfeed. So you can understand that this is pretty powerful solution for them. And the more misinfo is included in a certain content, it might be the video, it might be photo, it might be the written content, the less people will see it. Now, we obviously know that sometimes there is a criticism coming into our direction, why you're not deleting this type of misinfo content or like disinfo content. And this is not an easy discussion that we have within the industry, not within the company. First of all, there are different shades of manipulative information. And to be honest, when we as a company look at the scale of the things and how many misinfo pieces are out there, in most of the cases, this is unfortunately bad journalism, rather than like targeted information campaigns of one country against the other or like inside the country. Obviously, information campaigns exist, information operations exist, But when we look at the wider scale of things and what misinformation problems means in general, it is quite often the badly written content. The content just includes false information, but without the intention of purposely lying to someone or changing someone's opinion. So this is something that we also learned when we started looking into the stats. This is about reducing. And something that we learned when we were talking to different experts from around the world, including from the region in regards to COVID misinfo, is that they at some point, not from the very beginning of the pandemic, but at some point they started flagging us that removing content which is COVID misinfo sometimes is actually counterproductive. Because the experts in the field, those from both from the public health institutions, but also from the NGO, like from the civil society side, I would say more or less 1 year into the pandemic, they started flagging us that most of the false narratives about the COVID and about the vaccines, they aren't existing alone. This is the part of this like larger scale Western, anti-Western, anti-establishment narratives, conspiracy theories. And the moment we deleting those posts about the COVID misinfo, vaccines misinfo, it only makes people more sure that they are on the right side of the battle, or like on the front line. And we as technical companies, as Facebook, as Instagram, as Meta, we're simply just part of this big conspiracy theory against them. And this was very interesting conclusion for us, because obviously when it comes to COVID and health misinfo in general, we feel a special responsibility that we need to remove this information. But in fact, in some countries, we started receiving feedbacks that, well, the more information you remove, the more people become even more confident that they were posting the right information, that they should continue fighting both you, Facebook, and like the conspiracy theories around it. But in general, when it comes to removing information, we remove the information which is violating our community standards. And there is a specific policy that I already mentioned about the health misinfo and misinfo that can lead to significant offline harm. So obviously, from the perspective of removal of deleting information, we don't have that much that we can do on our own as a platform. That is why, as I told you before, we have the partnership for reducing misinfo content on our platforms with fact checkers. And the third field, which is very much important and that can't go against the first ones, but obviously the first two ones would make no sense without the third element of informing people about that they came across the false information and leading them to the sources where they can find truthful information or correct information. Why we're doing this and why we're talking about educating people, removing the distribution of the content. Because Facebook, no matter how popular it might be within our societies, it's not the internet. And if we just remove the content, we don't provide the context, we don't provide the labels, it means the person might go to a different platform, might go to the Viber chat, Telegram chat, will see the same information and will consume the same false information. And obviously, we know that the model is not perfect, that the moment that fake news has been created and has been, like shared many, many times, the moment the fact checker provides the factual information, the moment it takes us to apply this rating into the algorithms and start demoting this information, obviously it takes time, we understand it perfectly. However, we see fighting misinformation as a big project, which rests on several pillars that I already told you, like removing misinfo, reducing and informing people. And the key element for us is partnering with organizations on the ground. They have expertise and they can teach platforms what are the issues that we should look into and what are the specific problems. Because again, and this is something that I, as an expert in information security, understand very well now from the perspective of working at Meta. We, as technical company and you as representatives of the civil society, we're coming from different backgrounds, and sometimes we don't understand that well what is the value of each and every one of us. And only incorporating, in bringing our power to scale the solutions, to scale the tools, and bridging it with your information and your expertise, this is the way for us to move forward. Because we can write many different regulations that Meta, YouTube, Twitter, Telegram, they have to fight misinfo. It will never be possible without the local expertise, without know your knowledge, and without you checking and knowing what is happening in your countries. So thank you very much for your work, first of all, not only for today's panel, which was really very much enlightening for me, but also for all the analysis that you are doing. Definitely, I mean, I wouldn't say that we read all of the analysis that are coming from the region, but I already mentioned that we have a special team which is working on misinfo and which is working on policies. And this is a people who actually tasked, they're being paid to go around and talk to experts, to read the expertise, to read the analysis, and based on their inputs that they receive from the industry and from the civil society to come up with the policies. So even though I do understand that maybe this meeting and this introduction that we have today may be long overdue, but still, I'm really very happy that we had a chance to meet. This is definitely not the last moment that you see me or hear from me. I really hope that we will be staying in touch. And again, thank you for your work. I know, and just, you know, to end it on the very humble note, we as representatives of tech industry and me as representative of Meta, we're very, very well aware of the things which are not working properly on our side. And we have special teams which are working on solutions and thinking on solutions. So obviously, when you hear the press releases or when you can read our statements in the press, we have to be concise and we have to focus on positive things. On the day-to-day work, we are really very well aware of the shortcomings, of the things that we should be doing even better and better. So this would be my last message to you. When you're thinking about tech companies, so when you're thinking about Meta, even with all the things that we could be doing better and we are hoping and striving to do better, please do think of us as partners. Because we are definitely not running away from hearing from you, from learning from you. Maybe it's not always happening on the day-to-day basis or to month basis. I do understand that sometimes it's hard to get our contacts. It's not like you can Google the manager for a certain country and send him an email or to meet for a coffee. I do understand all of those things. But now when we had a moment to meet each other, please let's stay together. Your criticism, your remarks, your suggestions are really very much welcome. And this is the way for all of us as societies, as partners, as industries, as civil sector to move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katarina. And on this, I just continue on that happy note, so that we delivered exactly on what we promised, actually, that we want to have an engaged conversation with all the important actors and stakeholders at the table. So therefore, thank you also very much for your openness in the end, actually, of making public, actually, that not everything, actually, which needs to be presented differently in a press release, actually is reflected in the reality. And I think that's the common agenda of all of us in this seminar, to say, okay, we need to do better, because only if we do it jointly and in a cooperative manner, actually, we have a chance to fight the even way more bigger challenge. So because those foreign actors and also the domestic ones, as it has been described, which are basing or which use what had been created specifically by some of the foreign actors in previous years, actually, and they are continuing that legacy, actually. We can only fight these effects and malign effects on our weak democracies, and also as Thomas Silvers described at the beginning, so even countries like Germany might in specific rankings actually rank behind other countries like Estonia, actually. So there's always the good story out there, and I think we should all work on it. Let me just mention, because media literacy had been mentioned in all the calls, that our foundation also came up with an attempt, actually, to fight misinformation and teach people, actually, what it's all about. We created a game which is called the Disinformation Diaries, and my colleague Danielle put the link in the chat box. It is available thanks to Katarina's support these days in different languages from the region, and we're working on extending this. So you can play the game not only in its initial English version, and by now we have also a German version, but also in Serbian language and Albanian language. I don't know what else do we have, but we're working on more
Georgian
languages.
one.
Georgian one, of course. How could I forget? So because we I mentioned Serbian. So we're working on more languages actually, because we think so that also low-level entries of engaging people with that with this topic actually are important, and so I know that a lot of NGOs in the region actually are trying to use the same approach actually to reach out to people to raise awareness that disinformation and misinformation has a really devastating effect. And on this, I agree with Katarina. Let's call this the beginning of an interesting conversation. We should definitely continue, and we are happy to provide the platform for this. Thank you very much for all your interest, and also for everyone who went with us 20 minutes over time. This is the best proof for having that we all had a great conversation. And in this regard, I wish you all a pleasant day, and promise that we will meet again soon. Thank you very much, and thanks to you, Katarina, for your support. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.